Friday, whatever you want to call it, the weekend is almost here. And no better way to spend it than to be on the Strictly Stripes podcast as we talk about the offensive line to wrap up our offensive positional previews. Welcome into another off-season edition of the Strictly Stripes podcast. Got the whole gang all together with you. Muhammad Ahmad, joined by Andrew Gillis and Mike Neislick. And we talked about the tight ends Thursday, at least Mike and I did. Some great discussion there. And one of the big topics for that was, the big free agency coming up for three of their tight ends. Not so much the case with offensive tackle. You pretty much have everyone coming back next year, including with Jonah Williams, who I wanted to start with. He's entering his fifth-year option, which the Bengals extended last year, and also just had knee surgery in California. He should be good by June, according to reports. This is coming after his season-ending injury back in January when he played the Baltimore Ravens in the wild card round. And guys, like we said, it's his fifth-year option. To me, I think it might be his final year in Cincinnati. Do you think this is, is it his final year? Is it a prove-it year? And if so, how do you see the Bengals kind of planning for his future without him now with the draft and free agency coming up?
Well, I think with Jonah, any conversation gets related back to La'el Collins too. You've got two tackles coming off knee surgeries that they're actively rehabbing, and they're going to miss part of the offseason for. Obviously Jonah sounds like he'll be ready sooner than La'el Collins. But you've got two tackles that are coming off knee surgery. You've got one guy who's going into the last year of his deal. You've got another guy who's going into the second year of a 3-year deal. On a deal where, frankly, you can save a little bit of money by cutting him, not a ton. Right now you have to roll with both of those guys, but I think the more you look at it, offensive tackle is becoming an issue for this team and becoming a need for this team. If only just to get a swing guy in there who you can trust. Jackson Carman, there wasn't really a ton of drop off between what he did and what Jonah did towards the end of the year, but I think when you look at Jonah, it might be his last year in Cincinnati for sure. You do have a lot of guys to pay, but typically left tackle is one of those guys that you would like to lock up and like to pay. It's just the tackles right now for the Bengals are not in a great spot in terms of health, and that's gonna matter. That has to weigh on your decision making over the offseason.
Well, they're in a tough spot just because they don't have a lot of money to kind of invest to sort of upgrade now at this point. Jonah Williams, you mentioned his last year of his contract. His salary will be $12.6 million this year. That's up from $5.6 million last year. They really can't move on from him, obviously. So they'll have him. When you look at kind of extensions, the year two drafts before him, two of the first round left tackles, Colton Miller of the Raiders and Garrett Bowles of the Broncos, got about $18 million a year. Williams would call for an extension of probably at least $15 million. And I think the question is legitimate. Has he played well enough to earn that? Because I think if you extend him, you could probably lower the cap hit for this year and start to kind of figure out what to do on the opposite side. But I don't know if he has.
So, like you said, Andrew, it could be his last year. And, you're right. You really can't talk about Jonah Williams without talking about La'el Collins. Again, if the Bengals were to release him after June 1st, they'd save over $6 million in cap space. And I think there's a strong case to do so. He's about to turn 30. He already kind of didn't practice as much last year. He had a veterans rest day because he was already battling some back issues in the offseason. He may not even be ready till 2023 with his ACL injury he suffered in December against the New England Patriots. So to kind of ask you guys, do you guys keep La'el Collins next year? I know, Andrew, you kind of said you might have to roll with him, but do you roll with La'el Collins, or do you say, hey, he's getting old, he's been banged up, we got money to save, we want to extend Joe Burrow, save where we can? Do you move on from La'el Collins at this point? And if not, why not?
Well, I would hang on to him unless you absolutely need some of that money, because you would have $3.3 million in dead money, and you would save $6 million in cap space. So it's not a great savings to move on from him after this year. I think it's kind of financially viable to keep him. But I do think you need to invest in a tackle in some way because, he hurt that knee on Christmas Eve, and that's a tough turnaround to make it for training camp and everything like that. And we kind of saw the results of what, not having offensive linemen ready or healthy or able to play together in training camp looks like for the first 2 weeks of the season. So you want to have a guy healthy. You want to have a guy that can kind of go through the offseason program. And so I don't think you cut him. I don't think you get rid of him just because the cap is not going to be an issue this year. You're not going to have to go up against it this year. You're not going to need to pinch every penny this year, which is why I think it makes sense to keep him because, if La'el Collins becomes your swing tackle, because he's not ready for the season and you draft a rookie who plays really well, then you've got a really, really, really good swing tackle. And it's unrealistic to think that the Bengals are going to go through a season like they just did where up until the last 2 or 3 weeks, you were pretty remarkably injury-free. You're going to have some things come up. You're going to have guys go down, and you need to be ready for that. So I think you keep him for another year just because you never know what could come in terms of injuries and things like that. And, you want to build up your depth, and that's one way to do it. You have a competition at right tackle and put a rookie out there, and if he wins the job, whether that's because La'el Collins isn't physically ready or, he beats out La'el Collins, and so be it.
Well, it depends, too. I think they're going to probably need to get at least 2 guys, a veteran and a draft pick. So, that $6 million probably can cover 2, depending on kind of how you handle that split. Because they need depth. They lost Isaiah Prince. Hakeem Adeniji hasn't, I think, shown all that much. Jackson Carman actually probably was the brighter of the 2 in the playoffs. So you need two guys, I think, at least at tackle, and that $6 million might be what you're able to do to kind of afford that. Otherwise, I think it might be tough. I think, like you mentioned, they did not like having him sit out fall camp. It was tough.
I'm glad you mentioned Jackson Carman because, like Andrew said, maybe you get a rookie and he competes with La'el. But I'm glad you mentioned Jackson because, he was in an interesting category this year. He was pretty much inactive all but 2 games. And then you have all the injuries with Jonah and Alex Kappa, who we'll talk about later in the show with the interior line. But all those injuries come up and you pretty much have to put him at left tackle. Has kind of a shaky start in the wild card round against Baltimore. Has the game of his life against Buffalo, and then kind of had a hit or miss game, if you want to call it that, against the Chiefs in the AFC Championship. So I think it showed 2 things. Number one, he emotionally matured, which was the big thing that all the coaches harped on, that he grew up a lot kind of between his rookie year and last year, and he just looked more natural at tackle, which is where he played in high school and where he played at Clemson. So do you think maybe, to kind of jump into that, did Jackson Carman show that he maybe can compete for that same, tackle position with La'el and maybe another rookie they get? What's the likelihood that maybe he gets kind of a resurgence in training camp?
Well, I think he's earned a backup spot in terms of competing there. I don't know that he's good enough to be the starter right now. He only played 2 games or 1 game at that spot. That's not nearly enough to say, oh yeah, he's the guy. But I think certainly he'll be allowed to compete. I think he's a good option for depth, but you definitely need more depth from the outside. Their in-house options, I don't think, are at this point good enough to start. For a team that has playoff Super Bowl aspirations.
Yeah, like Mike said, for a team that, sitting here last year, everybody was saying, oh my God, they need to revamp their entire offensive line, and they almost did. They got 4 or 5 new starters. This year, you need new depth at the very least. I'm not sure that you're getting by with kind of what you had at the end of the year. And plus, you kind of look at some of the names, you'd like to get maybe some younger guys in there, some guys that are more controllable, quote unquote, if you will, in terms of their contract, because this team is going to have to worry about some money in the next few years. And if you can get a guy who's coming in on a 4-year rookie deal, who's a 3rd round pick, and you can get spot starts and, spot kind of moments from him, that's a good place to be. So you need to revamp your depth. I think Carmen can come back. I think, let's say La'el Collins is going to be ready for week 2 or 3. I think, Jackson Carmen, if you want to kick him over to the right side, I don't think that's the worst option to have a competition there. But I think any scenario where Jackson Carmen is kind of being handed the reins of anything is necessarily where you want to be right now. I think and frankly, it's training camp. There's competitions everywhere. Every job is pretty much open with the exception of a few. So, I don't think that that's where they'll be, but yeah, Carmen competing as that 6th lineman, that 7th lineman, that's, I think that you can kind of live with that if you're the Bengals, if you make some other additions.
I like what you said there because, on top of the fact that, you don't know about La'el's status and you have Jonah going into his 5th and what seems to be his likely final year, you also have Hakeem Adeniji, who was that swing tackle last year until he took over for La'el when, La'el and Alex Capel went down. He was the right tackle basically throughout the playoffs. He's in a contract year too. He's entering his final season. So, what do the Bengals do with him? I don't know. But if we're just looking at Hakeem Adeniji going into 2023, do you keep him at that jumbo tackle? I think you do. And then, like you said, you draft some guys behind him, behind La'el Collins, behind Jonah Williams. And then, if you lose a Jonah and or Hakeem, that person can either be, slotted in to start at left or right tackle, or that could be basically the next Hakeem Adeniji if the Bengals maybe decide not to move on with him or decide to move on with Adeniji in 2024 next year when he's up. That's more for next year, but it just shows you they have to start planning for the tackle position now because, they're going to deal with 2 free agents next year and one of them, being, Hakeem Adeniji is only a swing tackle, so you got to really build there. But they have some depth with Carmen. I don't know about Deontay Smith. He was more of a project pick 2 years ago who hasn't really worked out. He was mostly inactive last year. He was that jumbo tackle in the playoffs with all the shifting in depth. I'd see him kind of being like Isaiah Prince. Maybe they wave him to the practice squad and just keep him as a last resort. Because, again, they didn't really do much with him like they did with Isaiah Prince, who's actually now with the Denver Broncos. He's not even in Cincinnati. But, I know you wrote about this a little bit, Andrew. It seems like this is going to be one of those big priorities in the draft for the Bengals is, offensive tackle. What do you think in terms of just some of the names out there? Who sticks out to you? And how do you see the Bengals maybe not attacking this, but if you're the Bengals, what are some names you look at to consider just going into the combine and going into the draft at offensive tackle?
Yeah, so I wrote about like you said, I wrote about a few of them today. Obviously this is not an exact science. When you pick some of these guys, you kind of watch some of their film and watch some of their highlights and see who you think could fit. Anton Harrison, he's an offensive tackle from Oklahoma. The reason I really liked him was because you watch him play. He played in a pretty pass-heavy attack at Oklahoma. But then also than that, he just turned 21 and he's declaring for the draft. So he's got a little bit of that. I'm trying to think of the Lamar Jackson declared early, Matt Stafford declared it. You got a little bit of that where it takes a year, to kind of get acclimated to the NFL. You probably have to take this guy in the first round, maybe trade back a little bit, and select him there. But, I think that you can kind of work on him as kind of a longer term. Okay, this is an answer for us. Because again, the league is so pass heavy now. The left tackle position is not to say the left tackle position is devalued, but the right tackle position has kind of become more valued just because of how much teams pass. So, I liked Anton Harrison there. DeJuan Jones, offensive tackle from Ohio State. He's huge. I knew he was big. I didn't think he was this big. He's 6'8". He's 350 plus pounds. I saw a couple different estimates for his weight. I saw 380. Somebody said 350. So he's more than 350 pounds. Per Pro Football Focus, he allowed no sacks and 5 pressures among 393 pass rush snaps. He played right tackle in college. So if you're looking for an answer for La'el Collins specifically, there's a nice little answer for you. Cody Mauch, offensive tackle from North Dakota State. People have kind of raved about this guy in terms of what you're going to get from him. He can play offensive tackle or guard. played left tackle at North Dakota State. Pretty physical guy, kind of like he's pretty much the exact guy you would expect getting from North Dakota State. Physical guy, really, really violent football player, which is what you want along the line. And they liked what they got out of Cordell Volson last year. So, they've shown that they can take an offensive tackle, move him into a guard, and kind of make that successful. So, you could play him anywhere. The last guy I wrote, it's not a tackle specifically, but I'll mention him anyway. Jarrett Patterson, he was an interior offensive lineman from Notre Dame. He played really, really well, I thought, in the last couple of years. He was a two-time captain, really, really good in terms of moving up and down and around the line. Played center, played guard, which I think this team kind of needs, because when you're dealing with depth positions, it's okay to draft a guy if he's going to be your left guard. It's okay to draft a guy in the first round if he's going to be your right tackle, your left tackle. But when you're talking fourth, fifth round, you're not going to draft a guy and say, okay, well, you are a right guard only. Like, you need to kind of have some versatility there, and that's what Patterson provides. And that, I think in a mid-round selection, you get some good value for him. So I know that was a lot to throw at you, but there are just a few guys that I thought could work.
Yeah, I love it. I like that you mentioned Cody Mauch from North Dakota State. I was thinking about him because I was like, could we have not one but two North Dakota State Bison on the Bengals offensive line? I mean, at that point, maybe there's something to be said about why North Dakota State's O-line just puts together glass eaters like that, since that's what people call the Bengals offensive line, is glass eaters. But that actually would be funny if, like, somehow the Bengals do land him, and whether they make him a project and kind of develop him into 2024, that'd be really cool, especially if you still got Cordell Volson starting up front. But when we come back, we're going to actually talk a lot more about that interior line, including Cordell Volson, what went right for them, what needs to get better, and where the future looks optimistic for the Bengals interior as we continue grading the Bengals offensive line right here on the Strictly Stripes podcast. Hey there, it's Muhammad Ahmad from the Strictly Stripes podcast. You might be wondering, what exactly is Cincinnati Football Insider? Well, it's a community of fans who want the inside scoop on the Bengals and a direct connection to the Strictly Stripes podcast and the reporters who cover the team, and that would be me, Andrew Gillis, and Mike Neislick. It works like this. Andrew, Mike, and I will text your phone a few times a day with breaking news, analysis, and our insights on the Bengals. It's the inside scoop on what we're hearing, and we'll give you the inside word before it even hits social media. Being an insider is the best way to participate with the podcast and get in on special events and Zoom calls with me, Mike, and Andrew. And the best part is you can text us directly. It's a great way to cut through the clutter of Facebook, Twitter, other social media, and avoid the trolls for just $4.99 a month. Still not sure? Well, just try it for 2 weeks, and if you don't like it, you can text the word STOP at any time, but you won't want to cancel once you join the community of hardcore Bengals fans. Here's the best way to get on board. Go to cleveland.com/Bengals, click on the blue banner at the top of the page, or if it's easier, text 513-940-4193. It's a great time to try the 2 weeks free, as we'll be reporting live from the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. Plus, we'll be covering free agency on the way to the NFL Draft in April. Give us a try for 2 weeks and see what you think. Just text this number again. It's 513-940-4193 and become an insider today. And thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast. So we talked about left tackle, right tackle, basically just the outside tackles for the Bengals. Now to zoom in on the interior, and I think when we look at the interior, you could start with different guys, but I want to start with Cordell Volson because of just the interesting year he had. Drafted in the fourth round of the draft last year, came in as a starter, won that job in training camp over Jackson Carman. After the Bengals, released Quentin Spain last year, he earned that job as a part of that rebuild that they had in 2022. He had kind of a shaky start going against, Cam Hayward in your very first NFL game is definitely baptism by fire, if you want to call it that. But I think he settled into a groove. I think he showed a lot of growth during the season. Had a little bit of a rough game in the AFC Championship, but that's what happens when you got Chris Jones and Frank Clark lining up against you. So overall, I think he had a pretty good rookie year. But Andrew, you wrote about this a lot, and I know, Mike, I want you to chime in too. But what stood out to you about just the way Cordell Volson jumped in, being a day 2, day 3 pick, and what has to get better for him going into 2023?
Well, I think, anytime you jump in as a later pick like that, it's pretty hard to kind of join the NFL ranks especially from an FCS level where if you're playing at Georgia, Alabama, some of the bigger level schools in the country, you can say, okay, I went up against this guy and he was the 9th overall pick, the 11th overall pick. I think that kind of jump was impressive to me, but you kind of look at his year as a whole. It took him a little bit, that early Steeler game. There were some kinks that needed to be worked out. Then as the year went on, he got a lot better. You kind of looked at, the way that he progressed. And I think that, one of the things that you can do with a guy like that and kind of how he evolves is just the speed of the game. He's strong as an ox. He's really, really good. So he's got long arms. I think you can see a nice little jump for him in year 2. So, again, he was kind of what you wanted and more from a rookie and on that offensive line jumping in. And, I think just kind of the natural evolvement of his game is going to add him or have him have a successful year 2.
Yeah, I thought you saw as the season went on, one of the things he struggled with were those speed rushers. He'd get beat on that first step pretty bad, just like for reps here and there. But otherwise, he's pretty solid. He fit in with the group, good chemistry. They liked how he worked. They liked his work ethic, and that kind of, I think, set the stage for him, having the season he did. But otherwise, you have to be happy when you nail a 4th-round pick like that. And he's an immediate starter, shows improvement, and I think they're really excited about his future. Not just, he wasn't just a option for this year. He seems like a long-term type of deal.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned that, diamond in the rough maybe is a bit of a stretch because it's not like he was a 6th, 7th round pick, but to get someone like that in the 4th round, for him to jump in and start and rebound from the first game he had to get better and better as he got throughout the year. I mean, that's a big deal. Like if you look at his PFF grades, I know those can be very subjective when it comes to O linemen, but he got better each playoff game, even with how Chris Jones and Clark went against him. In the AFC Championship, he still didn't play a bad game. I mean, compared to like what the Bengals had from Quentin Spain at left guard last year, even though they made the Super Bowl with him, I mean, he got demolished half the time, I think. And then you get Volson, who seems much more polished. I like how you use that word, Andrew, built like an ox. You're 6'7", you're over 350.
Strong like an ox.
Strong like an ox. When you're 6'7", you're over 315 pounds, that's just something special to get, especially like you said, for him being a rookie. And then as you kind of shift over, I think where you get more heart and soul with the offensive line, dead in center, literally and figuratively, is Ted Karras. I mean, we could call him the Demeter Hound over and over again. And I think, refresh my memory, guys, did I make him our mid-season MVP? Because we did those mid-season awards, and I think, did I make him MVP, or did you guys do that? I think one of us did.
I have no.
Maybe?
I could not tell you.
I think it was
last season, dude. Mid-season happened 4 years ago, and you expect me to answer a question about it? I have no idea.
Well, the fact that my memory kind of had me thinking that shows you, like, from the minute he got to Cincinnati last year, halfway through the year, up until the end of the year, I mean, he was a demeanor hound. I thought at that time he was the best interior, if not overall, offensive lineman for the Bengals. I don't think there's really much to critique.
I just looked that up. And you completely made that up, just so you know.
That I thought so I didn't pick him as my MVP. I was wrong about that.
Joe Burrow was your MVP. You did not mention Ted Karras in any of your awards whatsoever.
Who were our
Wait,
MVPs,
not even the offensive line awards? Maybe that's what I was thinking of.
We didn't do offensive line awards, so that's an even better reference.
Honestly, Andrew was right. That was 4 years ago. I don't know what I'm thinking of. Maybe I'm thinking of
Mike,
some game balls.
Who were our MVPs? Out of curiosity,
Joe Burrow.
Was it a Joe Burrow sweep? Okay, thank God. Because again, I didn't remember it. I honestly would have never thought of it ever again if Muhammad hadn't brought that up. But I'm sitting there like, Oh God, please tell me I didn't try to go smart and pick like Jamar Chase or somebody dumb. Like, please tell me I didn't do something stupid. But okay, all right. Well, that eases some of my stress because I was worried.
I know what I was thinking of. I made Ted Karras my final game ball of the year in Kansas City, and I talked a lot about how I thought he had played just some of the best ball in the O-line up to that point. So I'm thinking back to 2 weeks ago, but with how scatterbrained the season made me, I was like mixing and matching different dates. But the point is, there's really not much to say against what Ted Karras did. He dealt with a lot of double teams up front, especially in the playoffs and especially against teams like the Browns and Steelers, and I thought he handled it well. I mean, you know, they had Trey Hopkins before that. The Bengals did at center. He's not even in the NFL anymore. They didn't get much out of him when, you know, they went to the Super Bowl because, I mean, there's a reason why the Bengals got rid of, you know, him and Quentin Spain. So how, you know, glad should the Bengals be that they have Ted Karras for at least another 2 years? I mean, he's on a 3-year deal. He just finished year one. I mean, if you're the Bengals, how much of a sigh of relief is it to have Ted Karras for 2 more years?
Yeah, I could see him being a team captain next year. I think he was that integral to kind of the leadership. I mean, I know he liked to kind of spread the credit around to Alex Kappa, especially with some of the communication things that they had going on. But just a great voice, a great presence in the locker room. Seemed to really enjoy the coaching staff. Obviously, was very different than what he had in New England. Not worse, just different, and it seemed to give him sort of a fresh start. Kind of reinvigorated him, I think, and I think both sides are very happy with how that deal turned out.
Yeah, pretty much to echo what Mike just said. I think he's kind of what you're looking for in terms of leadership for a center. You want to have a guy who controls the line of scrimmage. Every single one of his offensive linemen, fellow offensive linemen, respected him. That's the guy you want. That's calling signals. That's a team captain. That's kind of leading the way. So like Mike said, he did try to delegate some of that responsibility and some of that credit in terms of kind of what he said people were giving him at the end of the year. But he was pretty vital to that. You don't really need to worry about center for this year. He's your guy. That's one of the positions that kind of feels not very. It kind of feels not very up for grabs. So you're feeling good about what you have with Karras at center for sure.
Yeah, I really think, the Bengals hit a jackpot with him. They're going to keep him for a couple years, get some continuity. Like Mike said, I wouldn't be shocked, if he was a team captain next year. I'd be more shocked if he wasn't. That's really reverberated throughout the locker room, not just, amongst the offensive line, but the locker room as a whole. So you really got a lot of Ted Karras for what he's worth. And you mentioned Alex Kappas. I really think that in the grand scheme of things, just seeing how much better he got if he wasn't good already throughout the year, it really showed when he got hurt in the regular season finale with Baltimore just how much of a hit the Bengals took. Nothing against La'el Collins or Hakeem Adeniji, but you could tell once he went down and Max Sharping came in, that's where teams really tried to attack the Bengals because they knew Kappa brought so much strength that just wasn't there when he was out for the playoffs, that it made me think that he wasn't just the best, interior lineman for the Bengals. I actually think he might have been one of the most underrated right guards in the NFL, just for his experience and what he's done. I mean, do you guys think in the grand scheme of things he was underrated? And, I mean, how much do you think he shined just in general amongst the Bengals offensive line until he got hurt?
I mean, you said it. You really kind of felt his absence. I don't know if I would go that far in terms of underrated right guards. In terms of Pro Football Focus, which again, I've kind of voiced my concerns over, but he was 22nd in the league. Pretty solid guard there. But yeah, I mean, Max Sharping did not have his best day by any means against Chris Jones in that playoff game. I would kind of see him moving on, which is kind of going back to my original point. Like, you got to build some depth on the interior, but losing Kappa really hurt again for the things that like Mike mentioned, where Ted was trying to kind of brush off some of the leadership stuff and point to Alex and say, he's the guy who's kind of been helping me out with this. I forget the percentage that he said, but there was, he was like at least whatever percentage this credit, it was a significant percentage is going straight to Alex Kappa. So you got to have a guy like that. You need somebody to kind of anchor your interior. I think that Kappa is your guy to do that. But yeah, I mean, losing him was a really, really significant loss for not just kind of who they had coming up after him, but you lose a really, really good player. And I mean, getting him back, you have him for 3 more years starting in 2023. So that's certainly a welcome sign for the Bengals.
Yeah, I think he was the most consistent of the Bengals offensive linemen, but I don't know where that puts him sort of across the league. I don't think he's sort of like necessarily top tier, top 5, top 10 even. But I mean, that doesn't mean that he's not a solid contributor and an important piece. He was the most consistent, I think, throughout the year, and there's something to that. I think, especially with the rookie playing on the opposite side, you don't have to worry as much about him. And that was important to kind of how the group developed together, that it allowed Cordell Wilson to kind of have some of those growing pains, because Kappa stepped in and performed well right from, I think, the get-go, and only got better as the season went on.
Yeah, and, like you mentioned, Andrew, I mean, with all due respect to Max Sharping, I mean, he got demolished and ran over really from the minute they put him in, except maybe that Buffalo game, which, like I've said before, not to take away from the Bengals offensive line, but that Buffalo defense just looked lost, tired, and confused. The Chiefs defense was anything but lost, tired, and confused, and Chris Jones made him and Hakeem Adeniji pay. They got him off waivers last year, Sharping, on a 1-year deal, and like you said, he's going to be a free agent. I think that's someone you move on from. If you want to get someone else in free agency or hit the waivers again for the season, I don't think it's a bad move, but they paid a lot of money for him coming off waivers, more than I think they honestly should have, and I think, people would agree with that.
It's your contract. You just take the contract.
Yeah.
So you had a base salary of $2.54 million. So it wasn't like the Bengals negotiated that. But yeah, I mean,
that's still a lot for how he played.
For a depth guy on the interior, I mean, Max Sharping's probably I think he showed enough where, especially like that Buffalo game, like you said, he played really well. That's a game that Max probably wants to send out to other teams in the league and say, like, hey, I can compete for a starting job. I don't think Max Sharping would come back, because I think that he would kind of want that opportunity to start for a position on the interior, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, he's also going to have to show those teams why that tape against Chris Jones is not indicative of who he is, because, I mean, if you want to prove you're one of the best, you got to show why you can go against the Myles Garretts and the Chris Joneses and the, Joey Bosa's, whoever. So it's going to be an interesting conversation, but I think he'll end up somewhere if he doesn't come back to Cincinnati next year. But all in all, I think, like you said, that's a category you can deal with in the offseason easily. More than anything, the Bengals, I think just in general, from 2021, their offensive line got much better. Again, the tackles are still a big question, but I think it's still going in the right direction. Jackson Carman looked better. Like I said, you can get someone from the draft. The interior, I think, just did the best. They obviously, with all those names we mentioned, Karras' leadership, Volson being thrown in, Kappa's consistency, to kind of put a bow on this. I mean, what else really stood out to you guys in general from this Bengals O-line that we didn't talk about on this podcast today? And, how exciting is it for them just moving forward in 2023 with, whatever good things that you guys are thinking of?
Well, I mean, the continuity is going to be a big factor. You would hope that you can kind of build something from a year-to-year basis. But again, like, you're kind of where you were last offseason, where nobody played together in a real game up until that week 1 game, and Joe Burrow got dropped 7 times that day. Obviously, not all of them were on the offensive line, but they very clearly did get better as the year went along. Kind of their relationship with Burrow too, and I mean that in a football sense, where Burrow was kind of understanding his offensive line and was getting the ball out pretty quick. He only got sacked. There was a 4-game stretch where he got sacked like 4 or 5 times. He really wasn't getting taken down a ton for as much as they throw the ball, but you're kind of back to where you were, where, Jonah Williams, they say he's supposed to be, ready before June. We'll see. That's the original report. And if the Bengals, the Bengals are obviously hoping for that. La'el Collins, who knows? You might have to work in a rookie if La'el Collins isn't ready. It's going to be an interesting offseason to kind of see health-wise what they are, but the interior you're feeling good about. The tackles you got some questions on.
Yeah, I just think it goes back to that. There's going to be a cap crunch, and I think the offensive tackle might be one of the positions that are sort of hit most, where they're kind of in a bind to try to get replacements, but they really can't spend a ton of money on them. So I think it's going to kind of be tough to sort of navigate that the next 2 years.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, other than that first game, I think Joe Burrow, his body definitely appreciates his offensive line a lot more because he wasn't sacked more than any other quarterback this past season compared to the year before. So that's a plus. The run game, I think, has to improve a little bit, but I don't even know if much of that is on the O-line as much as it is on Joe Mixon, which we've talked about already. But other than that, I give a good grade to the Bengals' offensive line for how they did this year, like you guys mentioned. And that puts a bow on our offensive reviews. So stay with us next week because we're going to pick up with the defense as we start with the secondary and move our way down up front to the defensive line. But we'll start with the secondary like we mentioned. We'll talk about that on Monday as we also continue setting the stage with our mock drafts in the NFL Combine, which is already in less than 2 weeks. So stay with us for that. But once again, for myself, Andrew Gillis, and Mike Nizick, I'm Mohammed Ahmad. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.